Okay, well, thank you for coming, everyone. I really appreciate it. And so the rest of this presentation will be in high resolution DSD, just so you know. We start off with rock and roll, but the system actually does play classical and some other things as well. So thank you very much for coming. I've been thinking about this meetup for a long time, and I'm very excited everyone's here. And I want all positive, constructive feedback, please. Keep the negative to yourself, you know what I'm saying? So a lot of people have asked me what's changed since the last time we had a meetup here. So I'll just run you through it really quickly. So George helped me. We ran 2 dedicated power lines. So we have 2 20-amp circuits going from over there all the way through the roof, outside, and through here. And I really thought that it was like one of those things you read about, like gel or some, thing that is meaningless but sounds like it'd be important. But in fact, it ended up being extremely important because I was dealing with some noise issues, and suffice it to say, there's no noise coming out at all. And it really, what do they call that? The sound floor or whatever. Lower the sound floor. Also, the hairdryer works better now, so that's a plus. That's a plus.
The book of George.
So in terms of how the system works, the albums that I had when I was in my fraternity at Florida State a long time ago, I remember this orange crate that I had, a peach crate full of albums, a couple of them. And as I was leaving to go to New York City, I put them out on the front deck of the fraternity house. I'm like, guys, take them. I won't need them anymore. So that was a long time ago, and unfortunately I no longer have any albums. But I've spent a lot of time ripping tremendous number of CDs that are now sitting in my garage, as well as downloading from different sources and sharing with other people. And all of that is stored right here on a NAS, network attached storage, right? So there's, it's 6 terabyte. I'm running it 3 terabyte, so it's a mirror image. And then every Sunday, it goes to this other 3 terabyte. So to the extent this one fails while we're sitting here today, I have another one right there ready to go.
Do you want to rip all the CDs again?
I don't want to rip all the CDs again. And so the genesis of that, just for the record, was we were having a fondue party, which we have a lot of. And if you guys like fondue, I'm your man. And this guy, Mike Delman, who's not here right now, says, how mood changes and people having drinks, etc. And the mood changes, and this guy says, Madonna. I'm like, cool, I got Madonna. And so this is before the system here. But anyway, so I looked over there. Where's that Madonna CD? Damn it. I looked over there. Where's that Madonna CD? Damn it. I looked over there. So I went to all 4 of the places I normally keep CDs. I could not find the Madonna CD. And by the time I came back in the room, the mood had changed. And
Madonna?
I said right there, I will never have that happen again. So if anyone at any point wants Madonna, in 2 seconds we can have it.
You got her in a box over here.
And so, yes, well, there's some ladies here, so I won't say that joke. But anyway, so at that point, I started this journey of ripping everything. And it took about a year to rip everything. And I've got, slightly over a terabyte, I would say like 1.5 terabytes of music at this point. And a lot of it, the next part of my journey is not just listening to rock. I know that may sound crazy.
It's crazy.
But there's this thing called classical music. Has anyone here heard of that, classical music? So it sounds pretty good.
Like 40 years ago, I brought something with me.
And there's this weird thing called jazz. Does that ring a bell to anybody? I don't know. Jazz? What is that? I don't know. And then someone turned me on to female vocalists, like Norah Jones and all these people. So anyway, I'm expanding my horizons, and we'll see that for the rest of the day. I spent a lot of time thinking about how to get that from the hard drive to my system. And I'll just cut to the chase. Got an Oppo universal player. Basically, it plays everything. So to the extent you brought stuff along, rock and roll, or jazz and roll, or classical and roll, whatever it is. It's all networked via LAN, local area network, and works well 95% of the time. Sometimes I have some congestion, but generally speaking, works extremely well. That goes via HDMI, so using a bunch of people's advice, keep it digital as long as possible. Into my Integra preamp. That is different from the last time you guys were here. At the time, it was state-of-the-art, stereophile Class A, blah, blah, blah. And in reading up on it, it has one of the best stacks ever made. So, works for me. Oh, I forgot. So the power lines both come into these APC S15s, which are extremely heavy. I think about 80 pounds each, give or take. And Francis helped me with that, with his muscles. But anyway, about 80 pounds each or so. But they are power conditioners, battery backup, etc. So the power lines come into those, and they feed the rest. Also stereophile Class A. I'm getting that on ultra high definition. I could say that twice in the presentation. And actually, the Oppo is too, so that's 3. Obviously, over time, Soundfield audio will be stereophile Class A. To me, there's no doubt about it. Absolutely no doubt. I've been to many shows, Colorado, Tarpon Springs, where I met Alan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I've only found a couple of speakers that rival it. But for my taste, nothing sounds better. So thank you, AJ. So there's also a surround sound system you may see up there, up there, up there, etc. There's the amp. It's not on. So for those of you wondering, that is not on. I'm getting a lot of ambiance because of the super tweeters and the way that this back here without that. And what was the last thing I was going to say? So the Oppo goes into there. That feeds the speakers, and the speakers are completely powered. So that's a preamp. And I started going to these shows, and the open baffle sound appealed to me. Because I go to a live concert like I did with John and Mike the other day, and there's a lot of bass, there's a lot of punch. And just for me, the open baffle active systems just gave that to me. And that's the way I went. Different strokes for different folks, right? So, I also have an Apple TV as the source, a PS3, a Cyber Power protects the NAS, and FiOS, and these things. Anyone familiar with these things? Physical media? We actually have some physical media here, if you can believe that. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. You have music DVDs, concert DVDs?
I do have some concert DVDs. One of my favorites is the B-52s, actually. It sounds incredible. And we can play that later if you like. So that really ends my presentation. So this journey for me started with AJ and George coming over because I have this massive room that's very reflective, right? Glass, marble, high ceilings, etc. And I have these massive Snell Type Bs that are up to here, basically, and monoblocks. I love saying monoblocks. And I couldn't fill the room. I just couldn't get it done. And so the original concept was, let's build some subwoofers. And George came over, got here before AJ, and said, God, your speakers sound really passive. They don't sound bad, but they're not alive. And I'm like, exactly, I need some life. And so that started our journey, and we got the subs and the speakers. And so I want to bring up AJ, who's transformed what I think, in my mind, what a speaker can sound like, what a system can sound like. And so I thank you for everything. And he's going to say a few words. I'll play some reference tracks, and then we'll do some samples. And we've got tons of beer, Jack and Coke, chili, you name it. So AJ, come on up. And he's going to tell us about how these speakers work.
And the fact that I only had to write him a check for like $1,000 for him to give him all these props. So, is this recording or? All right. I don't know how many of you guys were here last time. It has not changed that significantly. The biggest changes that he's made is actually what he was telling you about the power conditioning. And I was one of those who sort of poo-pooed that kind of stuff. But the reality is today with a large house and with everything electronics, your refrigerator now has a CPU. And what that does is it generates a lot of RF, and it is not always contained within the system that it's working. Yes, Phil, I know. No. I'm saying that there are times where getting lower noise floor from your power dedicated circuits, that kind of stuff can make a difference. Now, fact of the matter is that a lot of times it does not. A lot of times that stuff is superfluous, that it's really just overkill. However, there are instances where you can have a place where there's so much line noise that a dedicated circuit like that will make a difference. And it clearly did in this case. It did drop the noise floor. The other big change from the last time whoever was here that you heard the sound was the preamp. His old Integra AVR, and this is true for a lot of AVRs, which some people are not aware of, is that stuff like Odyssey processing, even when they say it's off, it still is in the circuit and affecting the sound. There's been threads on AVS forum about that, that whole fact that when you think you have Odyssey off, it's still in the circuit. And so, to my ears, I was quite appalled by the sound we were hearing the last time. It was strident, it was harsh. When he turned it up, I had to go to the other room. It was that bad. Yeah. And I told him, and he probably didn't notice it quite as much as I did, because I know what the speakers sound like. Versus, you put it in someone's system, they're hearing it, but they don't know what it sounds like outside of their system. Right, and he's a headbanger. Exactly. As a matter of fact, if you're not already deaf after the first half hour of, So I was very disappointed with the sound that I heard the last time, and so I told him, I said, hey, it doesn't sound like that. There's something outside of the speakers causing it, and I'm not a big believer in fancy cables and all that kind of stuff fixing sound. There's basic components that are going to make your sound good, and it's the loudspeakers and what's driving them. Cabling and all that kind of stuff is just sort of icing on the cake, or dressing, if you want to call it. So we started from the start. He went back and yanked the Integra out. I don't remember if I brought over my own amplifier or had it powered just off my laptop, so we could hear the huge difference that the Integra was making, his old Integra. So we went out and got this new one, and that alone made a huge difference. I did tweak it a little bit, and that's also the beauty of having an active speaker system. With a passive speaker system, you plug it into your amplifier, you can move it around the room a little bit, but that's pretty much it. Long time ago, audiophiles stopped using things called tone controls, even though they are very useful. And so tweaking comes down to changing wires and all that sort of craziness. With DSP, like these are, I can plug it into my laptop and I can change the sound completely. And so that was part of the tweaking. Once we changed out the Integra, of course, that made all the difference in the world. But there were certain small things that I thought needed tweaking for this room. That I thought could benefit with a little tweaking to the DSP, and I did. A little bit of EQ with the DSP. You measure, you listen, and here's where we are. So for those who weren't here, this is my 1812 system. This is a coaxial driver. I don't know if you're familiar with Tannoy and Kef and those kind of things. There's a tweeter concentrically mounted with the woofer. So the woofer, or mid-bass I should say, acts as a horn, controls the off-axis of the speaker as it radiates into the room. Typically,
where's that crossing over the top box again?
This one is about 200 hertz. This operates from about 200 hertz to 50 hertz, and this is an open baffle, 18-inch. They're both pro drivers, so they can handle just thousands of watts and not compress until you go deaf, essentially, before you run out of headroom here. Right. Especially for a room this big. A big difference between, So I prefer drivers that don't compress when the music goes up in volume and in dynamics. That's a big factor that you not always realize listening to a typical cone and dome box speaker is not so much that it can't play as loud as these, it's just the dynamics. When you smack the drum and you hear that hit of the snare, these things will do it without compressing that, and it gives it a little bit more of a lively feel to it just from the fact that there's no compression in the sound. The other drivers are, there is a 12-inch driver underneath facing down. That is a servo-driven amplifier. It extends the bass down to about 14 hertz or so. There is a driver on the rear, and that is a diffraction horn, which is independently driven by this little Class D amplifier that you see in there with the volume display, so that if you're listening to a classical piece and it has a large soundstage, you can add that ambiance and depth back when you want it. You can turn it off, you can turn it up, you can turn it down. You're listening to a solo piano or a person sitting there on a stool playing a guitar, you can turn down the ambience because the soundstage then will not be as big. It'll be a little bit more immediate. You can turn it down or turn it off. So you can kind of have your cake and eat it too. He was talking about open baffle speakers versus, say, a typical box speaker. And you constantly read on the online forums, I had a pair of Maggies, and now I have a pair of mini monitors, and I love them, but I kind of miss the sound of the Maggies, and people go back and forth and back and forth. They can't decide on which one they actually like better. Well, this is my attempt to have your cake and eat it too. You can have the direct, sort of precise sound and imaging that you would get with a point source, which is what a coaxial is, and tight radiation pattern into the room, but the rear driver adds that ambience that you would have with a Maggie or a Martin Logan, a multipolar type speaker when you want it. Unfortunately, with a Maggie and a Martin Logan, you cannot turn off that radiation at the rear. Now, some people do things like put absorbers behind it, which I don't really agree with in the fact that, hey, you've got that rear radiation there for a reason, and it's to add that ambience. By absorbing it, you're actually killing the ambience that you have with that speaker. But people have different preferences. People like different types of sound. Here you can see zero treatment whatsoever. There's a carpet on the ground. I would go with a thicker one, but that's that's fine. You are going to get a lot of reflections here in this room. You put a typical speaker like what he had in here, like the Snell with a dome and a cone, to my ears, and of course I'm biased being Soundfield audio, but it sounded horrible because by the time you're sitting back there, you're getting so many reflections that the sound is just overwhelmed by the reflections. These, being coaxials and directional, you get a lot less reflection. If I turned off all the other drivers and you just heard these, you get a pretty precise, stable, center image, that sort of thing. Of course, you add in the dipole subwoofer at the bottom, you add in the rear driver at the rear, and of course, you get a little bit more spaciousness and large scale to the sound. So.
Those subs are playing?
Yes, that's
the corner subs.
Yes. Edward likes bass. In case you haven't noticed it, Edward likes bass.
But these speakers there without the subs go down to 14 hertz.
Yes, that is correct. So Super Tweeter starts out at about 14, 15K, goes up to about 27, 28. Adds a little bit of eeriness to the highs on the cymbals and the hi-hats and that sort of thing. This coax runs 200 hertz up to over 20, but I have it high pass so that low pass to this one. So it goes up to about 15 or so. This is 200 to about 50 hertz, so it gets most of the punch and the snap in the bass. And being open baffle, it radiates, as you know, like a dipole. That affects the room modes very differently than a typical box speaker. A lot of people like that slam of the box, but the problem with that is that there's so much sound radiated into the room, you get a lot of reverberation and overhang with the bass. When you hit that bass frequency, because it goes out and excites every mode in that room maximally, you get a lot of overhang with the bass. The notes sustain instead of going and coming quickly. With a dipole, you get a lot less of that. A dipole has huge nulls to the side because it's an open baffle. The sound radiating off the front is out of phase with the sound at the rear, and you get a large null at the side. So if you were to play just these subwoofers by themselves and you stand there playing bass, full intensity. You stand between them and the bass goes away. There's almost no bass because you're in the null of the dipole inside. Well, what that means is that the way it radiates out into the room, instead of exciting all the modes maximally, which will then have to decay in time slowly, it only radiates some of the modes. The tangential and oblique modes are not as heavily excited as you would with a box, and so the bass dies much quicker if you have a fast impulsive type sound. So, and then
I'm curious, sorry to interrupt. Why is it that most subs are sealed or maybe 2 drivers? What are the downsides? Why aren't there more open baffle subs and subwoofers?
Much harder to make, and the market isn't there for it. Most people like home theater. 99% of the market is boom, crang, crash bang type stuff. The audiophile market is fairly small. Within the audiophile market, yes, you do have, the quote-unquote audiophile name sub companies. Like,
If you go to audio, they've got a sub. It's just a flat panel.
Right.
That bass is really good.
Right. And GR Research also makes a kit. There's almost no pre-made dipole subwoofers that I'm aware of in the market.
Great to match a panel.
Yes.
Those things would be fantastic.
Absolutely.
No overhang, no stored energy.
Right. The dipole is definitely unique in the bass region in the way it affects the room and the sound that you hear within the room. Now with these, because this is a dipole, this is a monopole at the bottom, you can actually change the crossover frequency and turn it into what's called a cardioid, which actually radiates more forward, and the null moves from the side to the back of the room. So again, you can adjust the way these speakers radiate into the room to suit the room and your taste. Very, very, very few speakers on the market remotely have that kind of variability and adjustability. The vast majority of speakers are passive. They have, the latest and greatest diamond and gold drivers or whatever, which does absolutely nothing to the way it radiates into the room. It radiates pretty much the same way that speakers from 50 years ago radiated into the room. We know a little bit more about that now. So there's really not that much more to these other than the fact that they're fully active. So the DSP can, again, be adjusted, and all you need is a preamp to drive them. No tubes, but Edgar doesn't like tubes, so he went with the solid state pre. That's pretty much it. I guess you can hear it and hear for yourself whether it all works or not. The outside subwoofers were just something that he wanted more for home theater, and the fact that he's a bass freak. So, yes.
What's the one sensitivity on this system?
The native sensitivity of the coaxial is about 97 dB per watt, and it's essentially an 8 ohm impedance.
Those multiple subs, that's going to help from the room out.
That is correct. In a sense, the fact that there's multiple sources exciting the rooms, exciting the corner, exciting the tangential modes with the dipole and all that does help the overall response. Now, it is next to impossible to get smooth bass throughout an entire room this big just from speakers at the front. And so that thing over here is actually a subwoofer. That right there that's holding that plant is actually a subwoofer, and that is purely what's called a fill subwoofer. You can't hear it. It is Yes, it's just a 12-inch peerless driver, sealed driver, and an amplifier. It's wirelessly connected to the front system.
So you're trying to smooth room modes out with that. Yep. Right. That's what you're doing.
No, what I'm trying to do is get a smooth response throughout the room. The room had essentially a fairly large null across the halfway point, the half wavelength. It was fine in the back, it was fine in the front, but about right where we were sitting.
Smooth room modes out.
Essentially, exactly. And so that is just, it's a shaped response. The response to that subwoofer is shaped just to fill that null in the seating position across the middle right there. and that's essentially what does it. That's why it's sitting right there. So you can't hear it, but when you're moving around the room.
Measure the.
Oh, absolutely, we measured it. Yes, yeah. There was a large hole where you're sitting right there, and yes, right. So. And that's pretty much it. That's now I don't know if anybody's done this yet, but part of having a point source that is cross-fired the way these are turned in is that you can move sideways to sideways, and you can still hear somewhat of a center image when the vocal track is on and the image is supposed to be back here. Normally with a again, cone and dome type box, if you move close to this loudspeaker or move to this side, the sound comes primarily out of this side, and vice versa. With these, you should be able to move across the room, even in the back, and still hear somewhat of a center image. That's part. Yes, that was also one of his goals. Edward wanted something that was very room friendly, and you didn't have to sit there right dead nuts in the so-called sweet spot
Have you tried,
just to hear.
moving them to 45 degrees off, Geddes' recommendations? Have you ever tried even towing them in more?
Yeah, we have. We've experimented with the towing, but this is a pretty good balance of getting it to where it's across, it's across room, and it does crossfire a bit in front of you. It's the same principle. Same principle.
I mean, personally, I feel that the music's right here. I don't even hear the speaker. I mean, that's just how maybe I'm adjusting to it over time. I don't know, but to me, that's where it's coming from.
That's pretty much it. Yeah.
Very good. Nice. Much better than, I was here even pre-meeting last time.